Hey there, it's Kia here, and I'm your food and body love coach. In today's video, I'm going to answer a few questions I've been getting about my channel and address some key terms such as stress eating, emotional eating, and binge eating, share some common causes, some symptoms, as well as my perspective on what it takes to overcome these problematic relationships that we see with food. For the best advice on how to develop a relationship with food that fuels your life, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so that you can be notified of when I post a new video every other Sunday. So let's jump right in and let's define those three key terms that I mentioned. So the first one is stress eating. And stress eating is basically where one is drawn to consume food in order to cope with strong negative emotions such as anxiety or worry. Another term you might hear in this space is emotional eating. So all eating is emotional, and it's perfectly normal to have emotional associations with certain foods. Say there was something that your parents made for you when you were sick, or something that you associate with celebrations. But when we refer to emotional eating, normally we're referring to a problematic pattern that, including stress eating, is turning to food to deal with intense emotions. So that might be turning to food for negative emotional states, like stress eating, worry, anxiety, anger. But emotional eating can also include positive states, especially if someone is uncomfortable with feeling intense joy or happiness. Essentially, emotional eating is using food to deal with intense emotional states. So finally, I want to define the term binge eating. In binge eating, a person eats a large quantity of food in a short period of time. And this pattern can also be very much related to stress eating, where a stressful event may trigger a binge. In binge eating, similar to stress and emotional eating, this can look like eating more rapidly than normal, eating until one is uncomfortably full, eating even if you don't feel hungry, feelings of shame, embarrassment, and guilt, and feelings of disgust with oneself. Oof, I know that one all too well. And in a clinical diagnosis, they say that if a person shows binges at least once per week for 3 months, then that is a clinical diagnosis of binge eating. And while it's okay to overeat from time to time, let's say it's the holidays, Thanksgiving's coming up, and you eat an extra serving of pie. So that's pretty normal. But if overeating, stress eating, binge eating is something that happens more often, happens daily, then it can take a toll on your health, on your happiness, and your well-being. Okay, so I've defined these three terms for you. Earlier, I shared my own experience with struggling with binge eating and finding freedom with food. In my own experience, I was never clinically diagnosed with binge eating, though looking back, I definitely exemplified the symptoms. So whatever pattern is showing up for you, a problematic relationship with food can have negative consequences on your long-term health, happiness, and sense of well-being. In my experience and in watching those of my clients, probably the worst part of all is that having a problematic relationship with food means that it's hard to trust yourself. It's hard to trust yourself with food, and it really puts a damper on your self-confidence. So what causes each of these patterns? You can totally read online on WebMD and Healthline, and you'll read things about genetics, trauma, depression, other risk factors. And while these certainly impact someone's risk for developing a problematic relationship with food, as a coach, my main concern is in looking forward. So I want to give you my interpretation from over 4 years of coaching men and women in finding freedom with food. So perspective number one, dieting and restricting leads to binge eating. And it's been shown time and time again that for every restriction, there is an equal and opposite binge. Historically, diets have not been shown to work, and if they did, the industry would be running out of dieters at this time. So the key here is to move away from dieting and start tuning into your body's natural hunger cues. And this is something I often work with my clients in the group programs and my one-on-one coaching. I want to offer another perspective on this. If you notice that we struggle with food, it comes down to this. You've learned to use food as a coping mechanism to deal with strong emotions. And what's a coping mechanism? That's essentially a tool one uses to deal with intense distress or emotional states. So the example I'm going to give you is that of a crutch. If you've broken your leg, a crutch is a wonderful tool to help you in healing. However, if you use this crutch and you never see a doctor to set the bone in place, then the root cause never becomes addressed, and the crutch just becomes a replacement that never allows you then to walk well. So the same thing happens with coping mechanisms, where they're great in relieving stress in the moment, but an over-reliance on them and using them at inappropriate times can lead to pushing things under the rug and can lead to long-term negative consequences. So here are my thoughts about healing the pattern of using food as a coping mechanism. So when it comes to replacing coping mechanisms, what that might look like with my clients is 1, improving their ability to recognize their emotions and self-regulate. It could also look like 2, finding better tools and methods to cope that don't cause these long-term negative consequences and can help them get into a relaxed problem-solving mode. And 3, working then to address the root cause of the stress. So for example, I've had a client who was eating in response to hating her job. And so while we worked on coping in the moment, we also worked on helping her create a plan to transition out of her work and move towards a job that she really enjoyed. This can also look like internal causes of stress. So maybe there's a belief that no longer serves a client. For example, I have lots of clients who attach their worthiness to how much they get done and accomplish in a day. And I can say that because I totally am guilty of being that person from time to time. I had one client who defined success as finishing everything on his to-do list. But with our overconnected world, this meant that his to-do list was endless and he never felt successful. So the key in the coaching then was to replace the belief that success then is prioritizing what's important to him and making those goals realistic and reasonable. So one thing I want to share with you is that your relationship with food most definitely reflects how you're living your life. So I so often find that it signals both internal and external changes are being called to you to be made. So now you know the differences between the terms stress eating, emotional eating, and binge eating, as well as my take and my tips to replace these problematic patterns. So I would love to know, what is your biggest takeaway from today's video? Please leave me a comment below and share your thoughts so I can benefit and others can benefit as well. And if this video was helpful, please be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and hit the like button so I know to make more videos like this in the future. Stay well, eat well, and savor all that life has to give to you, because life is simply too short not to. Bye-bye!